Welcome to the latest edition of the Christian Recorder Dialogues. I am your host, Chuck Hobbs, and I thank you all for taking time out of your schedule today to engage with what I believe will be a very important conversation over the next hour or so. As we have advertised, we are here today with attorneys, reverend clergy, as well as the sister of Brother Pervis Payne, an individual who has been fighting for his life literally since the late 1980s. I won't get into a long soliloquy to begin, but do know that as this becomes an international cause célèbre, where there are people all across the world who are striving at this moment to ensure that justice is served in Mr. Payne's case, we have for you this afternoon, again, an opportunity to hear from the people who are at the vanguard of leading that fight. So with that, I'd like to introduce his sister, Rolanda Hollman, who is present with us this afternoon. We also have attorney Kia Harris. We have Bishop Jeffery Leath. We have attorney Kelley Henry. And we also have Reverend James Moody. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Chuck.
Good afternoon.
All right. Yes. And as we typically do, when we start these dialogues again, I'm Chuck Hobbs. I bring greetings from Tallahassee, Florida. I'm a former trial lawyer and a full-time journalist at this point in time, who hails from the 11th Episcopal District under the leadership of Bishop A.J. Richardson. My home church is Bethel AME Church here in Tallahassee under the leadership of Reverend Julius McAllister Jr. So again, for all who are joining us, feel free to give a shout out to your district as well as your home church as we begin. And as we begin, Sister Hollman, again, only just had an opportunity to meet you for the first time a few minutes ago virtually and what have you. But as I said earlier, my prayers and the prayers of all of us are with you and your family right now. And with that, what I would like to start with is, can you describe for our viewers what life has been like for your brother, as well as for all of the family members who have had to be on this journey with him since he was wrongfully convicted back in 1988?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Chuck. First of all, I'd like to personally thank you for this opportunity, to Pastor Moody, Bishop Leath, and to all of my great team right there, Kim and Kelley. I'm always grateful to have an opportunity to speak on behalf of my brother. I often say that I am his voice. And whenever someone is asking me to give any type of information, I am so happy to do so. So thank you for this opportunity. So that's a loaded question, going back 30 years. I won't go back that far, but I can tell you that there have been some highs and some lows, and sometimes the journey has not always been easy, I can say. But one thing about us is that what fuels us is our faith. And if anyone has ever followed us in any capacity or followed me as I advocate for my brother and fight for justice, you know that we are huge believers in Christ. So one thing that's sure is that our faith has been able to sustain us. I often say that whenever there is something that you're going through that is very traumatic in your life, you need to have something to hold on to. And for us, it has been our faith. It has been our hope that we've been able to put in our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Now, we're not, crazy in a sense to say, you guys are facing something that's very, pretty much out of our hands. So we understand what we're facing, when it deals with my brother. I often call him Bubba. So if you hear me say Bubba, then I am referring to Purvis. But I always say it's kind of hard for me to say Purvis because I've been calling him Bubba for the past maybe since I was 2 years old. So for all of my life, I've been calling him Bubba. But we understand what we're dealing with and what we're facing, but it is our faith and having the support of our family members, and the support of others who also believe in him and believe in his innocence on this journey has also been very rewarding for us. And it lights fuel to our fire whenever we get a little discouraged, whenever we get a little down, it lights fuel to our fire. This journey has been, for me personally, has taught me a lot. And one thing that I rely on is the scripture when it say, take no thought for tomorrow. For tomorrow has its own worries, its own problems, its own issues. So I have learned to just take a day at a time. You know, when you look at the big picture, not that we don't have expectation, because we do. We have expectation. But when you look at the big picture, sometimes it can be overwhelming. And so what I've learned is to really step back. And sometimes, you know, I've been to the point to where I'm not sure, like, God, I don't have the words to pray. I don't know what to pray. And I remember one day as something sweet just spoke to my spirit and say, just pray the Lord's Prayer. And when I did that, and I got to the point to where it came to, and give us this day our daily bread. And that's what I began to pray, you know, God, every day, give us our daily bread, give the daily bread to our team, to our law team, that they have wisdom, they have knowledge, they know what to say, when to say, how to move, when to move, and give us the strength on just today, because tomorrow will work out itself. So that's pretty much been, you know, our journey over the course of the years. I believe in also allowing my mother's voice to be heard. When my mother went down in 1987 and she told the cops, if you feel my son is on drugs, test him. And they never did that. They never tested him. And so when I think about that, I think about her voice wasn't heard. You know, when Bubba told he told the truth. You know, we thought Bubba was coming home, you know, that evening. We just tell the truth. You know, he told the truth, and how his truth was taken and manipulated, and his voice was not heard. It's something that really continues to light a fuel to our fire to continue to fight for his justice, and that his voice, and neither will my mother's voice, be able to die out in a time like this and what we're facing. So, you know, justice is something that we should not have to fight for. I often say that, you know, justice should be for everyone. But unfortunately, when I look around this world, I see that so many are fighting for justice because there has been such an injustice that has attacked our family. And not only has it attacked our family, but it's also attacked the victim's family too. Because there are three things that I say that my family and the victim's family have in common, and that is we've been lied to, manipulated, and deceived by this system that we so-call justice. And so when we fight for justice, we're not just fighting for Purvis, but we're fighting for those like Purvis and any victim's family that may fall in the same category as them. So this is a movement that we are creating, and I'm grateful to have the support to help us on this journey and the direction that we're taking.
Absolutely. And with that, I'd just like to follow up, because again, we're going to get into group dialogue here soon, whereby I will pose questions, and anyone who wishes to weigh in among the panel will be able to. There'll be a couple of questions that are specific to the Reverend clergy and as well as to the attorneys and what have you, but anybody can jump in, just say, hey, Chuck, I have something I want to say. But Ms. Hollman, there's one other follow-up I'd like to ask with that. You know, often when we deal with cases in this country like your brother's, I'm thinking back even 10 years ago with the gentleman in Georgia, Troy Davis. That was a big, huge issue that so many people followed, and it was gut-wrenching up to the last. But a lot of times we don't have an opportunity to really get to know who the individual is who is being impacted by the judicial process. With that, Ms. Hollman, just a quick follow-up. Can you describe a little bit, tell our viewers about your brother? Like, how is he handling everything? How is he hanging in there? What's his faith like, being that he has been the individual having to deal with this hanging over his head for over 3 decades? Can you describe that for our viewers?
Absolutely. You know, I asked him this not long ago, you know, just to touch up, because so much is going on. You know, back in 10 years ago, we didn't have this movement. We were trying to create a movement, but we didn't have this movement as it relates to him. So I'm telling him, you know, how the support that he has. I'm saying, you know, it's crazy out here as it relates to you. You can Google your name, you know, your name just pulls up everywhere. And I asked him, how is he, you know, how is he doing? And he said something to me. He said, you know, he said, I had to go back to my roots. He said, in order to sustain me, I had to go back to my roots. And I said, well, what is that? Because there have been many things that we've been taught along the way as we were growing up. And he said, I have to go back to my faith. He said, that's what keeps me moving. That's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me encouraged. And he has asked, before, like, why me? Why did I get into, how did I get into such a horrible situation like this? Why was I picked out? But he also has said, he's answered his own question, and he realized that if he can be a catalyst for change, a catalyst to be able to move and move this situation and this injustice system in a way toward justice, he feels like maybe it's just worth it. He's like, maybe it's worth it for me. But he has, had many times where he's had questions, and he's had, he's been down. But when he gets emails, not emails, when he gets letters from the supporters, and when I tell him how the supporters are behind him, it really does encourage him to keep on fighting. I often remind him sometimes about when my mother, before she took her last breath, she told him, don't give up. And I said, however it is, Bubba, I say, we won't let you give up. And so he remembers that, and having us as a support, my father and I have, and my family has never left his side. I mean, absolutely never. So he has our support. When he's down, we know how to help him pick up the pieces. When he's feeling like I'm not sure, we know how to come and lift him up. And we let him know that we are with him. And that's what encourages him, So he's, right now, I can say he's on cloud nine, because we've been trying to create this movement and get something going for him for many years. And to have this, to see our prayers and our efforts now coming into fruition, it is very comforting, not only to him, but it's comforting to us too. So it's very comforting for him. He knows we're a long ways. We have a long journey ahead of us, but his head is lifted. His head is lifted. So today there would be no sad story that he could tell you. He would just say, I'm so grateful.
So grateful. That is amazing. That is absolutely amazing. And I thank you for sharing that testimony with our viewers. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I want to actually move to the two counselors on the panel, Attorney Henry and Attorney Harris. Again, good afternoon. One of the things as I was preparing for today's dialogue that continues to stand out to me, I was a history major as an undergraduate at Morehouse College, and again in graduate school at FAMU. And so oftentimes when I do my writing, I try to interject both historical facts along with legal cases, because, what was still is to a great extent. And, we talk a lot these days about Jim Crow 2.0. Some people don't think that Jim Crow Sr. actually ever really died, just maybe morphed in different ways. And what stood out to me is the fact that the DNA evidence in this particular case, we all have been, I came out of law school, I want to say in 1998, 99. DNA is crucial. There's not been a murder case, sexual battery case, burglary case that I haven't handled that wasn't sometimes turned on the issue of whether DNA was there or whether it wasn't. And with that, you all have had some particular difficulties here with the prosecution with that very issue. I want to open up the floor to you all to describe to our viewers what the legal fight has been from a due process standpoint, trying to get evidence analyzed that could inure a benefit for Brother Payne in his journey to justice. So whichever one of you wants to start off, go right ahead.
Kim Keith? So I'll go first. Okay. If that's all right. Thank you so much, Chuck, for this opportunity. Bishop Leath, Pastor Moody, Kim Kia, Rolanda, it's such a pleasure to be with all of you today to talk about this very important case. And yes, we have had such frustration dealing with the loss of critical DNA evidence in this case. Purvis tried to get DNA over a decade ago, and the court denied his request back then on the basis of a legal theory that has since been abandoned and recognized as wrong by the court. So when I got on the case and realized, immediately that I was dealing with a client who was innocent, we sought to, reopen that request for post-conviction DNA under the statute, and we recruited the Innocence Project to help us with that because, they really are the experts, and Barry Scheck himself was personally involved. And we asked to have all of the evidence in this case tested. And part of the proof that you have to make when you ask for post-conviction DNA testing is you have to prove the evidence actually exists, because the court can't order testing on something that doesn't exist anymore. And so we listed all the items of evidence that we wanted to test. And this was alleged to be a sexually motivated murder. So we asked for the vaginal swabs. We asked for fingernail scrapings. We asked for testing of the murder weapon, for other items of evidence left at the scene, the victim's clothing. The DA responded to our request by saying that the vaginal swabs no longer existed, though there's no paper trail for what happened to them and when and why they don't exist. He just said they don't exist. But he said on July 29th of 2020 that the fingernail scrapings did exist. Now, that's critical evidence in a murder case, particularly one where a woman was stabbed over 80 times and really fought. One of her fingernails, there's a photograph of it where it is pulled back almost to the quick. And so we know for certain that her killer's DNA was under her fingernail scrapings. And they said they existed. And then on September 1st of 2020, after our case began to take hold, the media started paying attention. They started to realize that we were dealing with the case of an innocent, intellectually disabled man on death row for a racially motivated prosecution. Suddenly, they don't exist anymore. They don't know where they are. The fingernail scrapings have just vanished. And no one has made the law enforcement or the district attorney general's office come to account for what happened. Why the discrepancy? Where is the chain of custody? For this incredibly important evidence in a capital murder case, they have no explanation. And I was standing in court in January of this year asking the judge to make them tell you where this is. Where is this evidence? And she declined my request. But we did get DNA testing of the items that we were able to locate. Most importantly, the murder weapon. Again, this was a brutal killing with a number of stab wounds. And we know for certain that Pervis Payne's DNA is not on the handle of that murder weapon. Everything that came back in the DNA testing is consistent with what Pervis said happened. He came upon the scene and he tried to help. So it has been incredibly frustrating to us, the number of pieces of evidence that law enforcement failed to preserve or, just allowed to go missing, to just vanish into thin air in a capital murder case. I mean, it's just unfathomable that you could execute someone under these circumstances.
Absolutely. Attorney Harris, any follow-up on that particular question?
Just a little bit. Thank you again. Also, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be present too. I want to clarify my role. I am not Purvis's legal attorney or legal counsel, but what I am is affiliated with the the National Bar Association, which is essentially the Black Bar Association of Ben F. Jones chapter. And I'll just say how we got involved. We got involved because the DA, Amy Wyatt, in response to Kelley and the Innocence Project's request to test the DNA evidence of Pervis Payne, had a press conference. And in that press conference, it was very misleading. And some of the items that were listed to be tested, the DA spent a considerable amount of time explaining to the press how this was the wrong evidence and that this evidence was not properly tagged for his case. Now, why is that significant? Was she correct? She was correct that some of those evidence items were not correctly tagged, but she discounted or didn't even address the items that were part of this case that had never been tested. Now that got us involved because we didn't understand why you would not test evidence in a death penalty case where someone is scheduled for execution when there could be something that possibly exonerates. And that caused outrage for us in our community. And that is how we engaged in this case. We got involved in this case because we believe and we know the DNA evidence, as you explained, Chuck, has been the deciding factor in countless cases since DNA has been acceptable in the courts. In fact, this same DA actually made a statement after we started this uproar about Pervis Payne that DNA was not a factor and wouldn't be important in a criminal case. What district attorney doesn't use DNA? What police department does not use DNA in order to identify the culprit and also obtain a conviction? So we're involved just for the sheer injustice that we saw in this case. And we know that DNA is very important, but we got involved to help with the push. So that's how we pulled and we partnered with Kelley Henry and the Innocence Project with the family, because we wanted to make sure that that was done and that does have a place. And we saw that there was an attempt to miseducate the public and deceive the public. And we wanted to get involved because we believe that is the problem. When you see a wrongful conviction, you see a state actor intentionally putting out misinformation in order to execute someone, you got to get involved. And that is when we got involved in this process.
Amen. And kudos to both of you for answering the bell. And like the great Charles Hamilton Houston said many young years ago, being social engineers in this matter. With that, I have another follow-up before I swing a question to the Reverend clergy. Ladies, let me ask you this. With regards to the local district attorney there in Memphis, clearly cognizant, as you said, that these items are outstanding in regards to trying to get the testing done, see what, if any, matches are there. What has been that district attorney's office's posture with regards to maybe even trying to figure out a way to settle this matter, to work it out, to say, you know what, 1987, 88, this is what our office did. We went forward then with the best evidence that we thought we had, even though we disagree with that, but just saying that's an out for them. And yet now, we've had an opportunity to review through the wonders of science, and we're going in a different direction. Is there any chance at all that this particular DA would be willing to be so humble and gracious to allow justice to be served? Or is this something that is clearly going to have to be litigated to the very end?
I'll take that one, Kelley. So going back to how we got involved, my history is I was a former district attorney in Shelby County. So it's been many years ago. So I know the DA. I know the attorney who actually prosecuted Purvis's case. I don't live in Tennessee anymore, but that's one of the reasons I came back, is because the Ben F. Jones chapter of the NBA said after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we have to do something. We have to be involved. So a friend of mine said, I don't care that you live in Chicago, your roots are Memphis, we need your help here. And that's how we came across Purvis's case, because we've identified the district attorney in Memphis as having all the issues that you just outlined. Do we have a DA that will look at the evidence and look at grace, or do we have one of those law and order DAs who is going to stick to a conviction no matter what? Unfortunately, Memphis and Shelby County has the latter. So part of the reason was the motivation and how we got involved in Purvis's case was, again, educating our public, letting you know, there's a lot going on about police accountability, and it definitely has its place. But most people don't recognize or realize how powerful a district attorney is and how they set the policy for every single case in the system, not just some of them, all of them. So that is why we initially jumped on Purvis's case for a twofold reason. One, we believe that Purvis is innocent and he was wrongfully convicted. But two, because we have a district attorney who does not have a conviction integrity unit, who is not bringing those kind of convictions that just because they have age on it are not looking at it under the microscope of the new evidence that's being presented or could possibly be presented. We have someone in that old school of thought that has historically impacted us, especially in Black and brown communities, who is like, once I get a conviction, I get that number, I get that pat on the back, we're going to stick with it regardless of what the facts say. So that is why we have a twofold mission here. And when we partnered with Rolanda, and we explained that to her. I asked for permission from the family. I said, please let you know that this is also a mission of ours as well. And Rolanda said, use Purvis any way you can. And that's why we believe that he is a movement in and of himself, because of what his particular case will do, but what it'll do for others. We believe that when God lifts Purvis case up, he's going to open up the doors of many prisons through Purvis.
Excellent. And Attorney Henry, did you want to say something else on that point, or are we good?
No, Kim Kia had it straight.
Okay. All right. Very good. With that, ladies, I'm going to come back with some more legal questions in a minute, but we've got two pastors who are sitting here, and I want to get them to weigh in on something that I think is crucial. You know, when Sister Rolanda Hollman was talking earlier about her brother and the ordeal that he has endured over the last 3+ decades, you know, she has let our viewers know that he is still definitely grounded and rooted in his faith, and that he still believes that justice will be served. And as she was speaking, I could not help but think about Job and what it is that Job went through and what have you during his ordeal, and the beauty of that story. I want to ask you too, what type of message does this send, and how do you all as pastors and as Bishop Leath address when we're seeing so many systemic injustices that continue to plague our people across the country? And one can't get any worse than what it is that Brother Pervis Payne is facing right now. How do we counsel our members to continue to have faith when it is clear that the American system of justice continues to be largely separate and unequal with regards to dispensing justice? So I'm going to go with the bishop first, and then Reverend Moody, I'll follow up with you on that question.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I think the first response is hope is a long-term appropriation of faith. So you're never going to say that you have hope about something that happens quickly. Hope is something that is sustained over a period of time. And Brother Payne's testimony is a wonderful one, and it's one that is appropriate even in this season. As we are celebrating the resurrection, we are looking with hope for the return of Jesus. It hasn't happened for 2,000 years, but we don't stop waiting. We don't stop looking. And more importantly, we don't stop living with the hope that Jesus is coming back. And that becomes a critical factor for Brother Payne and for our people. We don't just have hope, but we live with hope. We wake up every morning, we put our clothes on, we go about our tasks, we lift up our prayers because we are believing with hope that in fact, every single day is going to make a difference for our life and for the life of others.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you. As believers in Jesus Christ, and we are servants in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, I was reminded that in the AME Church, the church started as a social justice movement in itself. And we think back to the fact that they affirmed their value all the way back in 1787 and to today, right to today, affirming the value of African-American people by standing against racism in whatever forms it shows up. That's a part of the mission statement of the AME Church. So our response to what's happening in Mr. Purvis Payne's life is to actively live out the mission that Christ has given the AME Church. That's what you see going on right now. The AME Church standing up, saying that this injustice must be addressed. And what I'd like to add is that our hope, using Bishop's perspective on this, is not only in what happens with Mr. Payne, but it is how we now respond and bring hope to others, because what happens with Mr. Payne is going to have ramifications in the lives of other people, not only in this country, but across the world. I think there are people watching what's happening in the United States, all across the world, and right now is a time that God is responding by making sure that justice is served. So our hope is that, yes, this case will end with Mr. Payne walking free and there being accountability brought in the case of how this has been handled from beginning to end.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I thank you for that comment, Reverend Moody. And I want to circle back to the top with the next question, which is, one of the issues in this case is the intellectual disability issue, which is also crucial. We've spoken a little bit about DNA. There's also the concern that Brother Purvis Payne meets all of the threshold requirements to avoid, in most jurisdictions, most states, being able to be executed pursuant with the Atkins versus Virginia decision from way back in 2002. So I want to ask a little bit about where do things stand with that right now? Because I know that throughout the country over the last 2 decades, at least, there's been somewhat of a push to try to avoid, in concordance with that Supreme Court precedent, to try to avoid executing individuals on death row who fall below a certain threshold from an intellectual standpoint. And then when I ask that question, I know that this has to be frustrating, Rolanda, for you as the sister, as well as for the attorneys and the advocates, because not only are you dealing with that issue, but you're dealing with the fact that Pervis Payne is still maintaining his innocence. So it's not as if, please don't execute him because he's below the threshold. But yes, it is part of that because that is a consideration. But there's still also the piece of, and he didn't do it to begin with. So who wants to take that first? Can we talk a little bit about where things stand with the intellectual disability issue?
So I'll start first and just sort of give the overview of where we stand, because I just came in from the legislature, where a bill that would allow Purvis to get into court, basically that eliminates the procedural technicality that has kept him out of court on this claim, just passed out of subcommittee. And if that bill, and it's on the Senate side this afternoon, there are a few more steps that it has to go through in order to be passed. But if it passes, it will provide Purvis an opportunity to get back into court to prove that he is intellectually disabled. And we are so grateful to our partners here in Tennessee and elsewhere who have really backed us on this legislation, from the American Bar Association to Jamella's to many law professors. It's wonderful to see this movement on this bill, and it's bipartisan support, which is fantastic. But when you were talking about Atkins, it reminds me that intellectual disability and innocence really go hand in hand. And in this case, what we have said is that racism, intellectual disability led to the wrongful conviction of an innocent man in this case. And that is why the Supreme Court said in Atkins versus Virginia that we don't execute people with intellectual disability because they are at a higher risk for wrongful conviction. And Purvis's case is the living embodiment of the principles that were discussed by the Supreme Court in Atkins. We're certainly hopeful that this legislation will pass. We also have a request for commutation of sentence pending in front of the governor.
That was going to be my follow-up, because what I was concerned about is, from a procedural standpoint, if the legislation passes and it's applied retroactively to the benefit of Pervis Payne, I was wondering what's the next step. Like, if it passes and he is deemed to meet the threshold requirement for being below whatever the standard markers are for an individual to not be able to be dealt with via the death penalty in your state, what would be the next step? Is there still a pathway for him to walk out of that prison and be able to be reunited with his family?
Yes. And that pathway right now is with the governor. But we are also continuing, as long as there's breath in my body and breath in Purvis Payne, to investigate this case, because we know there has to be more evidence out there. I've not been on the case very long, and most of the time I've been on it has been during COVID. But I'm a trial lawyer by trade, and I know an innocent man when I see one. And this man is innocent, and I will not rest until I come up with the evidence to prove that he's innocent. And if the governor doesn't see his way to granting him clemency to free Purvis from death row, we will continue to investigate until we come up with that evidence that opens the courthouse doors to prove that he is innocent, because we will not rest. This man did not do this.
Amen. And with that, Rolanda, let me go back to you with regards to that. Does the family harbor concerns that even way back in 1987, when this crime first was committed, that it was because of some of your brother's intellectual issues that might have led him to the point where, even in discussing what happened, was that an issue from your perspective way back in 87, 88, that had he not had these issues, perhaps the trial or the case would have been in a different posture? What's your thinking on that, Rolanda?
Well, it's kind of, I could say maybe yes and no.
Okay.
And the yes would come from, I believe, when I talk about my brother's intellectual disability, my mother never looked at us in a way to allow us to see that there was a problem. So she would try to protect him. She would always say, hey, you encourage him. You can do whatever you want to do. Maybe school is not your strongest thing, but you just know and believe in yourself, and that kind of encouragement that she would always give to him. So when this happened with him, he was doing what he's been taught to do, and that was to be a help. My brother is the most loving, most caring, funniest person. We all have a sense of humor, and we're always laughing about something, always having a great time. So for us, it was just a shock that we just could not, there were no pieces at all that we could put together that would even make us think that he would be close to doing something like this, or even hurting a child, let alone hurting a child. And we were, even the community, we were just like, no, not so. This is crazy. I think what feared us, if we had any fear, what feared us the most was not necessarily, maybe his intellectual disability, and maybe that, I'm sure with my parents, that was a concern at the time. But I did not understand the intellectual disability maybe in that aspect until I got older, because I was only 13 at the time when he was convicted of this crime. And so for us, we were, how my parents were, we were more concerned about how can we really support him and to show and humanize him and show that this is not his character. He wasn't raised, in a troubled home. Mom and dad were there, very active in his life. He never had any type of abuse, no criminal history, no juvenile history. So we were wanting to, bring these things forth, like how, this is not possible. No drug abuse, no drug use or anything like that. And so there was no history to line up with the person who actually commits this crime. What concerned us the most, I believe, and I know I'm speaking correctly, is that the fact that he was a Black man. Mm-hmm. And of convicted for, accused rather, for killing a white lady and her daughter. And so that is what we were more concerned. We were like, oh my. And even the neighborhood, the people in the community were like, I don't know how you guys are going to get out of this, because you know how they do us, as being, African Americans. And so we were, that kind of overpowered us and as a concern more than I would say, his intellectual disability at the time. He was just a helpful person. He was always a helpful person, always doing anything helpful in the church. If you all do not know, my dad is a pastor. He's still pastoring at 79 years old. He's still going forward. Maybe he needs to retire. So somebody reach out to him and tell him he needs to retire at 79. But he's still on the move. He's still doing. He's been pastoring for 38 years. So, being in the church and knowing, how to do, knowing right from wrong and things like that has always been what he's been raised to do. So when he went to help the people, we were not surprised by that, because that's what he was taught to do. Unfortunately, maybe he was helping at the wrong time, because he's been at the wrong place at the wrong time. Perhaps he was helping at the wrong time, but he was doing what he was taught to do, and that was to lend a helping hand.
Yes, and you know that the Good Samaritan story sticks out here, but it's also a nightmarish reality that your brother has had to face. You know, as I have learned more about this case and even this dialogue that we've had this afternoon, I've continued to place myself like, what would I do in this type of situation? And it's a shame that as Black people, we still have to keep that in mind if we stumble across a bad situation or a bad scene, wondering whether we will be the individuals who are looked at as the bad actor when law enforcement shows up. And that's, again, not theoretical. That's actually what has happened here to Brother Purvis Payne, and it is completely unconscionable. And with that, again, when we talk about Jim Crow, you know, you think about 100 some, not even 100 years ago, 60 some odd years ago, lynch mobs would have formed almost instantly to try to attack your brother as well as your family. I mean, our history is replete with examples of that type of bad behavior that was taking place. And yet this is still, and this is why I cringe sometimes when modern day politicians like to call everything and anything modern day lynching. This is a lynching. No, a lynching is a lynching. And this is the sham legal process that your brother went through is problematic along those same lines, which leads me to the next point that I want to make, which is there's also, I want to talk a little bit about the evidence that the victim's husband may have been a potential defendant, but was never really pursued. Can someone talk a little bit more about that? I know that when I was doing my background reading, I learned that he had been an inmate at the Fort Pillow State Penitentiary, and that rang out to me because, again, as a student of history, I'm fully aware of the Fort Pillow massacre during the Civil War up there in the Memphis area, where General Nathan Bedford Forrest, many of you know, he later would go on to be one of the leaders of the Ku Klux Klan, but General Forrest massacred a number of Union soldiers who had surrendered, the majority of whom were Black. And so when I saw that this woman's husband had been an inmate at a minimum security prison up there, the Fort Pillow State Penitentiary, I just was sitting there thinking, like, boy, the ironies on ironies here. So with that, is there any opportunity at all that prosecutors will take a renewed look at the husband's potential role in the crime that occurred back in 1987?
Well, that's certainly what we're asking them to do. I mean, when you look at the ex-husband in this case, he fits the profile of someone who would commit a crime like this. This is a rage killing. This is a case that you would expect it to be the husband. And then when you look in the ex-husband's background, you see that he viciously abused this woman and that she fled from Texas to Millington to get away from him. And yet he stalked her up to Tennessee. So you would look at him as the prime suspect. And then you would look at his family. He had a brother on death row in Florida for a sexually motivated murder. His other brother was shot and killed by their own mother because he was threatening her. And this man was ultimately, the ex-husband was ultimately shot and killed by a man who was acting in self-defense because this ex-husband was threatening the other man's life. So that is your prime suspect. And the fact that he was in the minimum security prison at Fort Pillow sounds like an alibi until you look behind it, but nobody did. We did. And we saw that the Fort Pillow minimum security prison at the time was such that inmates were not counted during the day. And it was known that you could just walk out to the road and your friend could come and pick you up and you could joyride all day long as you were back for evening count. No one cared because you were just doing minimum security time. And this prison was straight up the road from where this murder occurred. So he actually had motive and opportunity, but nobody investigated it. That's something that, again, you know, that shoe leather investigation, that's hard to do for something that occurred in the 80s, but it's something that I am chomping at the bit to do as, you know, with COVID lifting and having got my second shot last week. You know, and we like amplifying this case is so important to us because when people hear about this case, somebody out there knows. Somebody out there knows Kenneth Christopher did this. He had to have mouthed off at a bar or said something to someone. And we just hope the more this case gets out there, that someone will contact us and let us know what they know about Kenneth Christopher and his role in this murder, because that's justice for the victim's family as much as for the Payne family.
Absolutely. No one would ever want someone who did not commit a crime to actually pay with their lives for that crime. And I think one of the things, counselors, that stood out to me also when Sister Rolanda was speaking is that when you talk about the lack of criminal history, when you talk about the intellectual issues, when you talk about the genteel nature and what have you, I'm sitting here listening to her sound off so many mitigators in a death penalty case, and the only aggravator I can come up with is the color of Purvis Payne's skin. And that too is problematic, as you know, as I'm sitting here listening and hoping that not only does the legal case go well, but if it doesn't, then or if it does, but it's a toss up, that the commutation piece potentially will work as well. Because again, I just don't see where any of these factors would lead to, if all things being fair, for someone actually winding up on death row. And so again, my prayers, Attorney Henry, are with you as you continue to fight post-COVID and what have you, and get out here and try to do what should have been done long ago by the justice system, and force that Shelby County District Attorney's Office to see the error in their ways. With that, I want to go to the next question here, and I want to start off with you, Rolanda, and then I'm going to switch over to Attorneys Harris and Henry, and then I'm going to finish up today's dialogue with the pastors. So starting with you, Rolanda, as our listeners and viewers are watching and hearing this, you know, when I first posted about it on social media the other day, there were a number of people who either on my post or either direct messaged me like, hey, I hadn't heard about this one. I didn't know about this one. And so we know that it's taking off, so much so I think before we came on air, we were talking about that the Tennessee Supreme Court took the unusual decision to let everybody know, issue a statement, hey, he's not slated to be executed this week, right? But that's a good thing, because it's showing that the notice is getting out and that people are concerned. With that in mind, Rolanda, what would you say to our viewers as to how they can help right now with your brother's case? What things can the people do?
Well, first of all, I want to thank all of those who are on the call and showing your interest in learning more about his case. I often tell people, you know, before you go out and sign a petition, we definitely want you to do that. Educate yourself. And when you go out to his page, purvispayne.org, you will see some updates and 8 things that you need to know about his case that has been listed there by the Innocence Project. And so those are ways you can help. If you're in Tennessee or you know someone who is in Tennessee, we want to get our petition numbers up in Tennessee. And if you could tell them to educate themselves and to go out and sign the petition at purvispayne.org, that would be very helpful, be very grateful. And I know Kelley would probably give a charge as well, but definitely write to the governor, email the governor, keep calling. We are very aware of them the Supreme Court having to release a press statement saying, letting people know that April the 9th is not an execution date. To me, that spoke volumes. That tells me that we have an army of people who are also fighting for justice along with us, and that we have the support. So that spoke volumes for me, to be able to know that they had to put a statement out because we are being heard. Before this movement started, I heard, as I was praying, I heard roar. And so I've been saying to Kelley and Kim and our team, I'm like, hey, let's roar. It's time to roar. And that's what I believe is happening. And when you roar with us, meaning we're going to make noise, we're going to continue to call, we're going to write, we're going to email. I believe that that's what is going to continue to move us in the right direction. Faith without works is dead. You know, we can have faith all day long, but if we are not working and pursuing something and moving in that direction, it helps our faith to work even more. If you don't have faith, I tell you what, just a little ado. I keep these mustard seeds by my side. So if you just a little ado, if you put your faith with my faith, your mustard seed with our mustard seeds, we can definitely move this mountain. So thank you all for your prayers. Continue to pray and write the governor, contact your people in Tennessee, and tell them to get on this movement and help us free my brother.
Amen. Definitely. And attorneys Harris and Henry, what would you say to the viewers today on what they can do to help out? I know that they can't line up with the legal case and litigate, but I do know that there might be some things that they can do that could help with the burden that you all have as either direct advocates on the case or indirect advocates in terms of trying to deal with the extrinsic issues. So go ahead and let the viewers know what it is that they can do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank all of you for this opportunity. What we want to do is get the message out as far and as wide as we possibly can. So yes, www.purvispayne.org. Go to that website, sign that petition. That petition has more power than a change.org or a moveon.org petition, because you have to type in the name and learn about the case, and that sends a message. We are marching towards 750,000 signatures on that petition right now. It's currently at 660,000. We're going to get to 1 million. This is unprecedented. The number of people who have picked up on this case, and this case has resonated because we're telling the truth. We want people to sign that petition. We want them to email Governor Lee. We want them to call Governor Lee. I believe the number is 615-741-2001. But it's on tn.gov's website. Email Bill Lee, bill.lee@tn.gov. Tell him to free Pervis Payne from death row. They are counting. They get these messages and they keep account of every single count. Your voice matters. And if you know someone in Tennessee, please get them to also spread the word about this case on social media using hashtag Free Purvis Payne, hashtag Justice for Purvis Payne. Go on to TikTok. There are some TikTokers out there. I don't understand that platform, but the hashtag Purvis Payne has been viewed 24 million times on TikTok. They are starting their own movement again because we're telling the truth and people want to do justice. This is a man we can save. We can save Purvis Payne, and everybody, every step you take helps. This is a movement. This is a community. The more that this case gets attention paid to it, the greater likelihood that we are to get the governor's attention and to make him do the right thing, and to even convince that Shelby County DA that she needs to stand down and support justice in this case because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you so much, Counselor, for those comments. Sister Harris, let me ask you this, because I didn't want to ask Counsel that, but I'm going to ask you this. The district attorney, when is that district attorney up for re-election?
Excellent question.
What's up with that?
November 2022, and that is circled on our calendar, November 2022. So
Very good.
Thank you for asking me that question, because that is one of our things that our messages that we want to push out. But I also want to answer your question that you had earlier. Chuck, you mentioned earlier that you are a student of history, correct?
Yes.
And Pastor Moody gave us some history of the AME Church and how the AME Church actually came to be because of the activism inherent in the church. So how can you help us? You might have the ideas that help us. We don't have all of the ways to help Purvis Payne. When we partnered with Kelley in August of last year, we asked her, what is it that we can do to help you? I'm going to tell you how Kelley came into the meeting. If you could just sign a petition, I'd appreciate it and tell people. That was great. But there were other things to do. And so she told us at the same time that because she was an outsider, she lived in Nashville, and she didn't have the indoors or the connections in Memphis. So we told her at that time, our job is to open doors for you. And then God went ahead of us and has opened doors and windows and made straight the avenues. So what we need from your viewers is, if you got the ability to open a door, open a window, if you have an idea or connection, we're open to it, because this is a movement that's new for all of us. But we know God is behind this and all over this movement. So we accept gifts. We accept anything that you have that will help us save this man. I don't know if you're sitting at home and you know you got an idea, let us know, because everybody helps. This is a movement, as Rolanda prayed for and her family's been praying for, and a movement moves. And if you want to be on the right side of history years later, this is the time to jump on. So we need whatever it is that you have any ideas or anything that you bring to us that will help us advance the case of Purvis Payne, because we can't think of it all, we don't know it all, but we'll accept it all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Counselor. Definitely. And I definitely will keep in touch with you all as we get closer to November 2022, because I definitely believe that putting that political pressure is so critical. It's, money and the prospect of losing someone's power can be amazing impetus, so to speak, to make folks do the right thing. So with that, we will continue that dialogue off air. And I want to finish with Bishop Leath and Reverend Moody. Gentlemen, what can our denomination and our individual churches do to, number one, help continue to get the message out that the death penalty is an antiquated concept? I think that that's first and foremost, that government should not be in the business of killing people in retribution. And we can talk about that another day on another show. But a few days after we just got through celebrating the Jesus Christ's passion and resurrection and what have you, he was executed by Imperial Rome at the behest of Herod. So with that in mind, when people say, what would Jesus do? I doubt very seriously that no matter what someone is accused of, that he would advocate executing them. So with that in mind, gentlemen, what can our churches do to address this issue that disproportionately impacts Black people across these United States of America?
If I might humbly give the bishop the last word, I'll start off on this one.
Yes, sir.
First, if we can start with prayer. I know that prayer changes things. We hear that all the time. And what we're doing in praying is enlisting the presence and the power of God in Purvis's circumstances. We can start with prayer. Also, what we can do is encourage others. We can encourage other folks to not only get involved, but also our leadership in our churches. Members of the church can actually engage their pastors, their leaders, to now make special efforts to get congregations to sign the petition, to become informed, to actually get out and do the things that allow us to share what this case is about. Another thing that people can do is share the social media posts, such as this item that is going to be out on social media. Just take this and share it. Have your churches post it to their social media sites and do the kinds of things that help others to become more informed about what's going on. So I think those are some of the things. Another thing we can do is what we've seen happening with the movement is, and Kelley and Kimkia, these attorneys can tell you that what we've seen is organizations connecting to this issue, connecting to it in such a way that now we're bringing the might and the interest of those organizations to bear, in addition to the individuals who are now there. As I was thinking about what's going on in Chicago, what's going on in the AME Church. In the AME Church, we've got Bishop Leath, who is leading the charge. We also have Bishop John White from the Fourth, who has been a part of this effort since we got involved. And we also have our own Bishop Frank Madison Reed, who is the head of social action for the AME Church connectionally worldwide. But in addition to that, you've got people outside of the AME Church that were connected by AME Church members. Rainbow Push, Jeanette Wilson, Dr. Jeanette Wilson, who is executive director of Rainbow Push. You also have the NAACP through the Southside NAACP in Chicago. And I can list many others that I won't list, but the point is now all of these organizations are being connected to Purvis's circumstances through AMEs. And so we can do that. We can do that as members who are a part of other organizations, just informing them and getting them connected.
Thank you, Pastor. And Bishop Leath, you have the final word.
Thank you. I want to first say thanks to the many AMEs from around the world who have written the governor. I've gotten copies of at least a few of those letters, and I know there are many others who have responded to the call to write letters from various places, and we want to thank the AME family for responding and for spreading the word. Before I answer the question you put to me, if you would just allow me, I want to say two quick words. One, in addition to the district attorney in Shelby County standing down, that being the right thing to do, failure for her standing down on this issue has to suggest the wrong reasons. She needs to come up with some right reasons. And we need to highlight, people ask all the time, what do you mean by systemic racism? Give me an example of systemic racism. This is an example of systemic racism. Someone who was prosecuted before this person was probably even out of law school, let alone high school, has the capacity to come in and do the right thing, but instead is defending not justice, but an institution. Common sense. A blind person can see that there is more than a shadow of doubt, that there is more than a little bit of suggestion of innocence, that there is actually proof. And so you say, where is systemic racism? This is an example of systemic racism. I want to say thanks not only to the governor for what he's done so far, but I also want to say thanks for those legislators who are acting on the legislation in Tennessee. Tennesseans are supposed to be such big advocates of defending innocent life. Here is innocent life to be defended. And I'm looking forward to the legislature and the governor doing the right thing about defending, protecting, lifting up innocent life. And I am also looking forward to the legislature recognizing this is no favor to Black and brown people. This legislation is for all people of every race. And it's the right thing to do in this state that is supposed to have so much concern for life. And then finally, to answer the question, what we can do as AMEs in our churches. One, we need to give vent to the opportunity for those who have evangelical political thinking to correct it when it comes to this issue. There are a lot of closet AMEs, I'm sure, who are not on the right place on this issue. And so we need to begin discussing it within our denomination. We need to give vent to some of those opinions. We need to debate it so that we know for a fact we all are on board with the fact that capital punishment is not the moral thing to do. And we also need to be educated on other forms of justice that should be taking place in our country. And we also need to support the efforts not only of the Innocence Project, but other efforts to help the innocent find life and true justice in the world. And as Pastor Moody has already said, prayer changes things, and we continue in prayer.
Thank you so much, Bishop. And again, it has been my honor and a pleasure to speak with each of you. And I will continue to pray for each of you. And I will continue to pray for the Payne family. And I will continue to pray for justice for Purvis Payne. And I ask each of you, our viewers, to do the same. With that, I will yield the microphone to my boss, our editor, John Thomas III.
Thank you, Chuck. And again, it is an honor for us to have hosted this. As Chuck and many of us have said, we celebrated the crucifixion, we commemorated the crucifixion of an innocent man last week, and we're trying to make sure that that does not happen again. We have been asked and inundated with questions regarding how to support Pervis Payne. So one more time, we want to put the banners for you, and we're going to tell you first, go to www.purvispayne.org to sign the petition. People have asked who can sign. Anyone can sign it. However, we especially need people from Tennessee to do so. I'm from Tennessee. I've already signed it and will do so again. Secondly, you can share this on social, email the governor at billlee@tennessee.gov and tell him to free Pervis Payne from death row. Email Governor Bill Lee at bill.lee@tn.gov and tell him to free Pervis Payne from death row. For those of you who don't want to type, you can also call the governor of Tennessee, and we're going to show you that number again one more time. At 615-741-2001 to tell him to free Pervis Payne from death row. And also, again, you can share this dialogue on Facebook go to the innocentproject.com, go to different places and spread the word on social media with the hashtag Free Purvis Payne. Free Purvis Payne. Before we leave, again, I want to thank you for being here. This was a special one for us to do because, you know, your editor lives in Chicago, but I'm from Nashville. And so it was great to see Pastor Moody, Bishop Leath come together for the church to help us do this. And I've made new friends here all over the place. And also, I want to give a shout out to my best friend, Aaron Butler, who does death row work in Texas, who was mentored by Kelley Henry. So this was very special and personal for your editor. But above all else, we are here today to advocate for the justice for Purvis Payne. You do know we've had a budget cut, and I want to salute briefly the persons who helped make this possible. Today, we were able to do this dialogue through the generosity of Darwin Eldridge, who is from Tennessee. He is a candidate for treasurer for the AME Church in 2021. And also through the generosity of candidate for judicial council, Ida Tyree Heitch Hill. And as I believe Reverend Moody said it, and I'm going to say it again, in the AME Church, we always let the bishops have the last word, or the lead clergy. And so at this time, I would like to ask my bishop, Bishop Leath, to leave us with the benediction.
Gracious, we pray for the continued encouragement and liberation of Pervis Payne. We pray for the continuing encouragement, healing of his family and friends. We ask that justice might prevail in the land. Strengthen the attorneys who advocate his cause. Change the hearts of those who've been hardened against justice. Be with the legislature of Tennessee and the governor, that they will be moved to do the right and just thing. Be with those who will stand with justice around the world. Keep us in your care. Empower us with your wisdom. Let us always have hope and never give up. Bless us with these things, for we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you all again. God bless you in this Eastertide season.
Thank you.